All right, let's dive into a really fascinating and honestly pretty wild time in American history, the Gilded Age. It was an era that was just defined by this one huge contradiction. See, on the one hand, you had this mind blowing explosion of progress. I mean, industrial capitalism was just roaring to life. Giant new companies were creating fortunes so big nobody had ever seen anything like it before. And it was fueling these incredible leaps in technology. But, and this is a huge but, all of that progress came at a staggering cost. It was literally built on the backs of millions of people who were working these low-paid, dangerous, and often deadly jobs. So you get this bizarre picture of a glittering, golden world of wealth existing right next to the most crippling, grinding poverty. So where did this name, the Gilded Age, even come from? Well, what's so interesting is that it wasn't some formal name from a history book. Nope, it actually comes from a satirical novel by Mark Twain. And if you think about what gilded means, covered with a really thin layer of gold, it just perfectly captures the whole idea of the era, this shiny, prosperous surface that was hiding all sorts of corruption and deep social problems right underneath. And believe me, people back then were completely mystified by this. An economist named Henry George totally nailed the central question of the era in his best-selling book. He basically asked what was on everyone's mind. How on earth could so much progress be creating so much poverty at the exact same time? To really get our heads around that question, we have to look at the sheer scale of the economic divide. It was, without a doubt, a tale of two Americas. Okay, so at the very, very top of this new food chain were the titans of industry and finance. You've probably heard of them. They were often called the robber barons. We're talking about guys like Vanderbilt with his railroads, Rockefeller with oil, Carnegie in steel, and J.P. Morgan in banking. These men built fortunes so massive that even when you adjust for inflation today, they're still some of the richest people in American history. So, just how concentrated was all this new wealth? Well, the numbers are pretty jaw-dropping. By 1890, the top 1%, just a tiny sliver of the population, already owned a full quarter of everything in the country. But you know what? It didn't stop there. In fact, the whole trend was just picking up speed. By the time the calendar flipped to 1900, the inequality had gotten even more extreme. The richest 10% of Americans now controlled an absolutely incredible 90% of the entire nation's wealth. Just look at that. It's so lopsided. The vast majority of the money was in the hands of a tiny group of people, leaving, well, basically just scraps for everybody else. So, a big question comes up. How do you justify an imbalance that extreme? You're going to need more than just money to do that. You need an idea, an ideology. And that's exactly what happened. A whole new set of ideas came along to argue that this level of inequality wasn't just okay, it was actually natural and good. And that key ideology was called social Darwinism. It basically took Charles Darwin's scientific theories about evolution and, well, it kind of twisted them and applied them to human society. The whole thing was popularized by a guy named Herbert Spencer, who gave us that phrase we all know today, survival of the fittest. So here's the critical part of the argument. According to social Darwinism, being rich wasn't just about being lucky. It was seen as proof that you were biologically superior. One of the fittest. And the flip side of that? Well, helping the poor, whether through charity or government programs, was seen as a terrible idea. It was interfering with the natural order of things by helping the weak survive. This quote from the journalist H.L. Mencken just captures that brutal logic perfectly. The core belief was that real progress could only happen at the top, and any time or energy spent trying to help people at the bottom was just a waste that was holding all of society back. And don't think for a second that this was some fringe theory nobody listened to. It was embraced by the most powerful people of the era. We're talking industrialists like Carnegie and Rockefeller, and even celebrated inventors like Thomas Edison. And to really understand just how extreme and, frankly, how chilling this line of thinking became, just listen to this statement from a Yale professor, William Graham Sumner. The idea that a person has no more inherent right to life than a rattlesnake, what that really does is it erases any moral responsibility to help other people. It justifies a complete and total indifference to human suffering. Okay, so you've got massive wealth concentration on one side, and you've got an ideology to justify it on the other. The final piece of this puzzle was the political system. So how did the government let all this happen? Well, it didn't just let it happen. It actively protected and supported it.
In this era, big business found its most powerful friend in the Republican Party. Now, this was the party of Lincoln, right? It was originally founded as an anti-slavery party, but over time, it had completely transformed into the #1 defender of corporate interests, and it consistently used its power to protect capital over the rights of workers.
And this chart, wow, it really shows you how dominant they were. I mean, look at this. Between the Civil War and the Great Depression, Republicans won 12 out of 16 presidential elections. They pretty much ran the Senate for most of that time, too. This wasn't just a political party, it was a political dynasty built to serve business.
So what was the point of all that political power? Well, one of the key policies was something called a high protective tariff. The easiest way to think about it is like a giant dome placed over the country. It was an import tax that made foreign goods really expensive, which shielded American companies from competition. It basically created this protected playground where these new industrial giants could grow to be absolutely massive, with almost no government interference.
And that brings us right back to where we started, with Henry George's great enigma, that paradox of progress and poverty. The Gilded Age was a time when society was wrestling with this massive question of how so much incredible growth could happen at the same time as so much deep suffering. And looking back on it all, it kind of leaves us with a pretty important question for our own time, doesn't it? Has that enigma ever really gone away?